Bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
All right. Welcome, Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah, man. You like the way I show my teeth? Masses. Yeah, man. Today's Monday, September 25th. 268 days into the new year. Just 97 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in downtown Burbank, California, and I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States, hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? You survived the end of the world once again. It's a good thing, too, because tonight we have very special guest. Randall Carlson is here to give us all a sacred geometry lesson 1.0, 101. Somebody tweeted, it's a good thing it's not 102, right? Think about that. Or 1.01. Really looking forward to this. And I'm going to let everybody know, if you go over to jimmychurchradio.com right now, depending on where you're listening from, you don't have to interrupt the broadcast. But if you go over to jimmychurchradio.com and you scroll down right there on the homepage, you will see right there, I have to do the scroll down to Randall Carlson. Down at the bottom, you will see a gallery button. Click on the gallery, and there are 16 images there that we are going to use for our presentation tonight. Also, by clicking on the gallery, it will not interrupt the feed. How cool is that? It's not going to take you to another page, cancel things out. You got to figure things out. You don't have to do that. Just do your thing, listen to the show, click on the gallery, and there it is. There are 16 images there. Okay? Simple enough. For those of you that aren't going to be able to click on the website for whatever reason, fair enough. Twitter, we will be posting up each image in Twitter as the show goes along. Okay? All right. So I don't even need, I've got Twitter. Do I need the website? I don't know. I'll leave the website open. We'll see. We'll see what I choose to do tonight. Welcome, everybody. And it's been a very, very busy month here. Just came off a weekend over at Coast to Coast 2 as well. No time off. We did yesterday celebrate the ending of the world. That didn't happen. And cooked, had a very nice cookout over at the house. So I'm rested. You know what's really good? Leftover ribs and corn on the cob the next day in the microwave. I'm just going to say, I don't think there's anything better. I mean, leftover lasagna, good. It's good in the microwave. But, man, ribs in the microwave with corn on the cob. Leftovers. Yeah, so I'm ready to go today. There's no doubt about it. Tomorrow, okay, get ready for this. Tomorrow, Phil Proctor is going to be here, and of Fire Sign Theater. And, we're in a generational gap here. Okay, so for those of you out there that were, how do I just say this, all into the Fire Sign Theater and all those albums and everything that went down in the 70s, it was a phenomenon, right? And I was one of those. So to have Phil Proctor on this show tomorrow night to tell us all about it and all of his experiences, and you knew, if you were a fan of Fire Sign, you knew that there was something esoteric going on behind the scenes. You knew it. Well, tomorrow we're going to find out all of that stuff, and he is one of my heroes. And I can't tell you the countless hours that I spent with headphones on, listening to Fire Sign Theater. So tomorrow night, Phil Proctor is going to be here live from Washington, D.C., and that is going to be a not-to-miss show. He does not do this kind of thing. His movie career, his television career, and everything that he does, he's a very, very busy guy, very accomplished. And we can talk about some of that stuff tomorrow. I mean, the Rugrats and Toy Story, just all of that he does the voices of, and all the video games. But that's now. Fire Sign Theater, 50 years, right? He's been in the business for 68, and just the guy. So tomorrow night, Phil Proctor right here on Fade to Black. Wednesday night, Maureen St. Germain is going to be here. She's got a new book out, which I've got. It's called Waking Up in 5D. So we're going to talk about that. It's my favorite subject with Maureen, 5D, right? 1D, 2D, 3D. Okay, kind of understand that. 4D, 5D. Now we're getting into a zone where we need to sit and talk with the right person, and that person is Maureen St. Germain. So we're going to do that tomorrow night. Thursday is another Fader night with John Rappaport, and there's No More Fake Newsroom Live. And I don't think tonight we're going to have time to open up the lines because it's a history lesson tonight with Randall Carlson. And that being said, take notes because I will have a pop quiz later. Okay? So don't just try to phone it in tonight, kids. No. No, don't try to borrow, notes from class from the person sitting next to you because you want to snooze out. It ain't that kind of party. Okay? Because it's Randall Carlson. Somebody, I don't know if it was a post I read somewhere, nobody does good beard like Randall Carlson. And I just laughed. That was very insightful. So that's what we're doing tonight. Follow us on Twitter at JChurchRadio, Facebook, YouTube. Everything is Fade to Black. You know what to do. Just go follow, like, and subscribe over the website. Click on those little buttons. If you want to hang out on Twitter, the sandbox is hashtag F2B. Hashtag F2B. Yeah, I see it. Yep, those ribs looked crazy. They were. And I don't know, those ribs that I posted yesterday, I don't know if you could tell in the picture, but they were this big. They were like, each rack was 2 feet, man. It was literally, they were that big. Ribs all week long. All right, email throughout the show, Jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. That's simple. Breaking news. Iranian TV, right before showtime tonight, Iranian TV released video footage Friday claiming to show the launch of a new type of medium-range ballistic missile a few hours after they displayed it in a parade, right? It's rolling down the street in a parade on the back of a truck. And then they turn around and say, you know what? Check it out. We're testing that missile, right? Well, as it turns out, they didn't. No. And they posted a video, too. They got caught. They never fired a missile. The video released by the Iranians was more than 7 months old, and it dated back to a failed launch back in January, which resulted in the missile exploding shortly after takeoff. They didn't show that part of the video. They only showed how dumb do you have to be? Well, it just turns out there was no. And this is, it fooled a lot of people, including Trump. Trump said, okay, and now they're working with North Korea, which they probably are, for nuclear stuff. But it just turned out it was all bogus. Okay, so we can relax a little bit there. Not a whole lot. Don't totally, relax, but it wasn't a real missile launch. All right, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We have over 700 archive shows, custom apps, Apple and Android, everything updated, ready to go, all platforms, just $2 a month. Okay, $2 a month. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the podcast banner, get her done. All the instructions are right there. Or you can become a Fader Not. And for that, just go to the membership section on our website. And there's 4 levels. It's free all the way to Game Changer. Choose your poison, make it happen. And if you want, you can even get autographed hats. That's right. Man, I love my River Moon coffee. Speaking of River Moon coffee, all of our sponsors here, Life Change Tea, GetTheTea.com, River Moon Coffee, New Pharma, GNU Pharma, Ancient Life Oil, Sacred Skulls. Right now, Sacred Skulls 15% off. All you got to do is mention Jimmy or Faded Black when you order. Studio Dome speakers. It's a family here. All of our sponsors are family. Let's not forget that. So by clicking on those banners, by going and visiting the sponsors, by asking questions and going to New Pharma and checking out the science behind their stuff, Life Change Tea, the best super strength life-changing tea in the world. You'll drink it every day for the rest of your life. You only got to do it once, and that's it. The addiction starts. Same thing with River Moon Coffee. It only takes once. The addiction starts. See, we do this on purpose, everybody. That's why we choose our sponsors for addictions. Yeah. All right. Everything that you need is right there. Support the show. Okay, and go and visit all of our sponsors. Let's get the show cracking. Happy birthday to today, Will Smith. That's right, I'm going to do it. 49 years old. Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker. Today is 66. Michael Douglas is 73. And also today, let's say happy birthday to Heather Locklear, 56. Our dead guy's birthday today is, moment of silence, please, Christopher Reeve, 1952 to 2004, tragically died at the age of 52. He will always be remembered as Superman, and that's it, right? But he was tragically paralyzed in a 1995 horse riding accident, was out doing his thing, and the horse refused to jump on a third jump, stopped. He went over the front of the horse stopped. His arms got tangled up in the bridle, which ripped off the horse. That stopped him. He ended up landing directly on the top of his head, broke his neck, and was paralyzed. He received a Screen Actor Guild Award in 1998 and the Lasker Award in 2003, but he ended up dying of an infection and a reaction to antibiotics on October 10th, 2005 in Mount Kisco, New York. Happy birthday, Christopher Reeve, Superman. On this day in history, OTD. Yeah, big day. The Partridge Family in 1970 premieres on ABC television. Based on the real-life family band, the Cowsills, right? Have you... Something in my throat. Have you, seen the documentary Family Band by the Cowsills? You've got to check that out. It's one of the great documentaries. I've seen the documentary 10 times, and I don't do that often. It's really that great of a documentary. Anyway, think about it. Keith, Lori, Danny, Chris, and Tracy Partridge changed the world, didn't they? And we can't forget Mother Shirley. Well, in my world, they dusted the Brady Bunch. All right. Fader fact, the state of South Carolina gave Marilyn Manson $40,000 not to play there. Randall and I were talking over the weekend, and he brought up, when we were talking about the prophecy, right? The end of the world, September 23rd. The boy who cried wolf. Now, we all remember the fable, don't we? A shepherd boy repeatedly tricks nearby villagers into thinking wolves are attacking his flock. when a wolf actually does appear and the boy again calls for help, well, the villagers believe that it's another false alarm and the sheep are eaten by the wolf, right? And the moral to the story is simple. It shows how liars are rewarded. Even if they tell the truth, no one believes them. Teachers have used the fable as a cautionary tale, telling about telling the truth. But a recent educational experiment suggested that reading The Boy Who Cried Wolf increased the likelihood of lying. Over the weekend, Rita just comes to the bunker. Are you okay? I've got something in my throat, folks. Over the weekend, we had yet another prophecy that the world would end on Saturday, September 23rd. Last week on Fade to Black, I spoke about some of the prophecies since the year 1990, prophecies that didn't happen. Then I did an End of the World special event over at Coast to Coast AM on, of course, Saturday, September 23rd. And guess what happened? Well, nothing. We did this show and the world didn't end. The really funny thing for me was that out of all of the calls I've taken over the last week between Fade to Black and Coast, the number is like north of 100. Not one caller said that they believed in the September 23rd prophecy. Not one. Nobody said anything about it. Now, I woke up yesterday and looked out my bedroom window after doing Coast on Saturday, and everything looked pretty normal, right? Shocking. I know. No seven-headed dragon in the sky wreaking havoc on humanity. Nope. Couple of chemtrails maybe, but other than that, there was nothing. I wasn't really expecting anything, but you have to understand, you never know, right? Even with me. But in this case, like any doomsday prophecy, we know the truth. We really do, if you think about it, but I had to check anyway. It's the boy who cried wolf. Now, somebody just posted. I'll get to that in a second, John. I just saw David Mead's name. Schmuck. It's the boy who cried wolf, for real. And the problem we have is actually, it's very, very simple. Most prophecies, like this last one, are based on the Bible. And in the Bible, Jesus himself says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, nobody will know when the end will come. And for me, pretty much, that's the end of the discussion. A smart betting man goes with the baby Jesus. And I'm smart. And I like to gamble too, but that's another story for another time. That's a whole nother show. So you have to ask yourself, as I do, how can someone today, anyone, know when the end of days, in a religious sense, know when the doo-doo is going to hit the fan? Well, according to Jesus, they can't and they don't know nothing. Nada. You don't have to be religious at all to be able to say to someone who is actually buying into this prophecy, some religious person, and I get that, but you don't have to be religious to say to them, and I'm quoting here, hey, do you believe in what Jesus says, or are you really willing to bet the farm on this guy who actually knows nothing? He doesn't know anything. If you're religious, don't you put Jesus and the Bible first, then some nut job? Think about this for a second. To be honest with you, my money's on Jesus. It's a safe bet, Vegas style. Now, let's take the things to the next level. Stay with me because I'm being very serious right now. If the four horsemen show up, the sea start boiling, the rapture kicks off, earthquakes, fire in the sky, well, two things come to mind. Number one, you didn't see it coming. Nobody did. And two, there was nothing you can do about it. Nothing. From this point, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. Praying ain't going to fix anything. Your life up to this point determines what happens next, right? So scratch that. Find something better to do with your time, like, seriously, putting on some sunscreen. You just got to ride this out. Take some pictures, post to Facebook, live stream, Periscope. But you can't do anything about it. For me, well, I just pretty much want to see Richard Dawkins' face as he looks to the heavens. You know, Richard, holy crap. You mean this stuff is real? I'd pay real money for that. I'd take a selfie with Richard. The end of days. Because he'd be forced into writing out the whole thing to the bitter end anyway. You know, that's called payback. But here's the rub. What if somebody got it right? What if somebody actually figures it out? It's the boy who cried wolf. Nobody will pay attention. At this point, even the most religious of the religious, they are getting tired. They'll all let their guards down. Think about it. And I'll wake up in the morning, I'll look out the window, and I'll see the 4 horsemen riding up the street. That's right. But it won't be the Bible's version of the end of days. It won't be Nibiru or Planet X. No. My money is on Kim Fatty Fat riding a donkey. And that's the truth. Everybody is all worked up. I don't know why people still believe and sell the farm, quit their jobs, and expect somebody today to know when the end of days is here. That's it. I don't get it. My audience is smart. The Coast audience is smart. The Fadernauts are smart. Nobody sent me an email going, Church, how can you do this? How can you say this kind of stuff? You know, we are really worried, man. Have you read the facts? Have you read the facts? I got one email, one that said, hey, man, you know, what you said, you know, on Fade to Black and Coast to Coast, man, it's blasphemy. You know, you need to go and read. This is a 7-year prophecy, man. And this dude, David Meade, has got it all laid out. No, he does not. He does not know nothing. Nothing at all. The number 33. You're going to base everything on the number 33 and the eclipse. And that he's got it all right. No. Nothing happened. Nothing is going to happen. And if it does, Meade doesn't know. Nobody knows. Nobody. That's it. That's it. And I'm not poo-pooing on anybody's religion. I'm not poo-pooing on any of that. I'm saying if you trust in the Bible and you are religious, then your faith starts and stops at Jesus. That's it. And we have the boy that cried wolf. So we're stuck. Completely stuck. Get yourself some sunscreen. Ride this baby out. Just live the best life that you can. And that's my words of wisdom for the day. This is Fade to Black. Tonight, Randall Carlson is here. It is a Sacred Geometry 1.0 lesson. Take notes, kids. We're going to have a pop quiz a little bit later with prizes. I'm going to take a short break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. This is Fade to Black. I'll be right back with our guest, Randall Carlson. Stay with us.
You're listening to Jimmy Church, Fade to Black.
Fade to Black will now pause for alien identification.
The station that talks the net. KGRA Radio.
When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roast it to the dark side of Fade to Black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Yes, River Moon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Teppy.
Hi, folks. Let's wind the clocks back 60 years. Food was different. Food provided health and nutrition, and using supplements was minimal. Unfortunately, now we have chemicals, GMOs, herbicides, and pesticides that can be quite lethal in the name of our food supply and, of course, the ever-loving dollar. Supplementing our diets can be very important to stay healthy. Cleansing from daily intruders to the body might be critical. Live strong and take charge. Log on to getthetea.com. Our herbal tea is a great way to cleanse from intruders. Our supplements is a great way to maintain and improve your health. When your health is not up to par, go to getthetea.com. No GMOs, no fillers, and organic, and very helpful in keeping you at the top of your game. Life is too short to feel, you know what I mean. Stay in the game, at the top of your game with getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Again, getthetea.com.
9 out of 10 geneticists agree.
Fade to Black is not your father's radio show on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the planet. Win big with KGRA this summer. Tickets and hotel accommodations to the biggest conferences, autographed books and DVDs, chances to win all-inclusive conference cruises, and private dinners with your favorite KGRA hosts. Click the contest tab at kgraradio.com for your chance to win big this summer. Your contact for the best alternative talk radio on the planet. kgraradio.com.
Hi, this is Rob Reiner from Anvil, and you're listening to jimmychurchradio.com.
What's up? I'm Chris. What up? This is Kyle Massey, and you're listening to Jimmy Church Radio.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I want to remind everybody the great week that we have lined up in front of us. Tomorrow night, Phil Proctor of Fire Sign Theater is here. Unbelievable. Wednesday night, Maureen St. Germain, we're going to be here talking about Waking Up in 5D, her new book. Thursday night is another Fader night with John Rappaport and his No More Fake Newsroom Live, followed by open lines all night long. Tonight, Randall Carlson. That's right. Sacred Geometry 101. 1.0 is going down tonight. Before I bring on Randall, I want to remind everybody that over at jimmychurchradio.com, there is a gallery. Scroll down to Randall's bio right there. You'll see it. Gallery. Click on that. Won't interrupt the show or anything. You can check out the gallery as we move along through the show. If you are not on the website, or if you're with one of our affiliates or KGRA, wherever you're listening to the show in syndication, go over to Twitter. We will be posting all of the images on Twitter as well. Randall Carlson is a master builder and an architectural designer, teacher, geomythologist, geological explorer, and renegade scholar. He has 4 decades of study, research, and exploration into the interface between ancient mysteries and modern science. He has had an active role as a Freemason for 30 years and is a past master of one of the oldest and largest Masonic lodges in Georgia. Now, the acclaimed 1997 TBS CNN documentary, Fire from the Sky, was based upon his research into the Earth change and catastrophic events. His work incorporates ancient mythology, astronomy, earth science, paleontology, symbolism, sacred geometry and architecture, geomancy, and other arcane and scientific traditions. For over 25 years, he has presented classes, lectures, and multimedia programs synthesizing this information for students of the mysteries. Now, he is uniquely qualified to interpret the hidden meaning of the great masterpieces of mystical architecture, as well as esoteric and occult ritual and symbolism. It is his aspiration to effect a revival of that lost knowledge towards the goal of creating the new world based upon universal principles of harmony, freedom, and spiritual evolution. Tonight, we're going to get a sacred geometry 101 lesson. Now, take notes, kids. There will be a pop quiz later. And I got to tell you, Randall, it's a mouthful, but I never tire of reading your bio. Welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me back, Jimmy, and putting up with me again.
Yeah, putting up with you. It's called Focus, Focus, Focus. And Randall, just thank you for all that you do. And before we get started, I wanted to ask you this, because we talked over the weekend, and your insight, you really opened up my eyes about prophecies and why people, what's your take on that? Why do people, when this end of times biblical religious stuff surfaces, why do people believe some guy's opinion over what Jesus said in the Bible, which Jesus said nobody knows anything, right? but people want to believe these prophecies. Why do they do that?
Well, I think it's innate in our perhaps in our genetic constitution, in our psychological makeup, because we as a species have suffered enormous catastrophes before. We have experienced worlds coming to an end, in a sense, on multiple occasions. Sometimes maybe just a regional event that has wiped out an existing culture, or events that have affected the entire planet, such as the ones that we agreed not to talk about tonight,
right.
Such as the Younger Dryas and so on.
Right.
But yeah, I think that's part of it, is that, our ancestors have experienced extreme catastrophes that have pretty much wiped out the world as they know it, and perhaps it's something that we carry within us. I'm not qualified to speak on whether or not such traumatic events could be passed down from generation to generation, or whether it could be something that's encoded genetically, but I think that could be a possible explanation for why people do believe that events like that could occur. Now, if you look into the work of people like C.G. Jung and others, Mircea Eliade and others, who looked at the power of myth and the power of dreams and found this recurrence of imagery redundantly encoded into these various things that would represent probably the deepest aspects of the human psyche. They found evidence of these kinds of phenomena that we seem to carry within our dream world, scenarios that could be interpreted as catastrophic.
Well,
and then also go ahead.
And the issue is a very simple one. If something was going to kick off, probably there's nothing that we can do about it. You got to write it out, no matter what. But the flip side, if somebody actually knew that it was going to happen after we've lived through so many different situations of the boy who cried wolf, then nobody's going to do anything, even if somebody got it right.
Yeah, and in our discussion over the weekend, we were talking, and I cited that, I wrote an article once upon a time that's probably, I think it's on the Sacred Geometry International website. I think it's posted on there. It's called The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and it essentially is that idea. And what I did was I went through and I cataloged all the various end-of-world predictions that I could find from the time I was in high school back in the late 60s. And, you know, the story, the moral of the story is usually taken that, you know, if you lie about things too often, and even when you're telling the truth, nobody's going to believe you.
Right.
But then the secondary moral of the story is that in spite of the fact that this boy kept making up stories and lies about the wolves eating the sheep until finally nobody believed him anymore, when the real wolf did show up and ate the sheep. So, you know, that's part of the scenario, is that in spite of the fact that there's somebody raising all of these false alarms, there is a real wolf out there somewhere.
And you know what's funny, before we move on, I believe, and I think that MIT and Caltech and some of the recent mathematics is certainly showing, Walter Cruttenden is certainly showing that there is a body out there in space that is, you know, having effects on gravity in our own solar system and interfering with things. And the math says that the only thing that could be doing this is something out there that we haven't found yet, a Nibiru, a Planet X, a dwarf star, a binary star. We don't know what it is, but certainly science is saying that that is real. But that doesn't mean that Nibiru or Planet X is going to slam into planet Earth in the next couple of days, weeks, months, or a year. And that is, again, part of the fascination that people have, because science is saying there is something out there. And there have been all of these predictions about Nibiru and the stories and the Sumerian texts and the Anunnaki, and we get all of that. You know, so we're kind of caught in a paradox, too.
Yeah, that's what it would seem like. And I don't know, you know, personally, I cannot say that I have any inside knowledge on the whole question of whether we're a part of a binary star system or whether there is or isn't a Planet X. You know, I've looked at some of the data. To me, it seemed, you know, it seemed indefinite to me. But there may be new stuff that I haven't looked at yet. But certainly, if we are paying attention to what's going on right now, in that we can actually see and observe. I mean, about once a month, we've got a close flyby of some cosmic debris that's shooting through space. You know, we just had a very large one last month that, had it impacted Earth, would have caused extreme devastation. So it's interesting that astronomers who are actually looking into near-Earth space and keeping track of the activity are realizing that, yeah, near-Earth space is actually quite active with debris. And, you know, geologists and planetary geologists that are looking at the ground under our feet are discovering more and more that there is evidence of these cosmically induced catastrophes. And then, of course, we have the whole legacy of mythology. When you used the term geomythology earlier to talk about one of my interests, which is how ancient peoples recorded information via myths that we have tended to believe that were, you know, spurious or based upon, you know, a complete lack of understanding, that they were exaggerated scenarios when we talk about great floods and fires and so forth, which have been intrinsic to all of these myths that have come down to us about world destructions. We now know that, yes, there have been gigantic catastrophic floods that have the capability of wiping out pretty much everything that somebody would know. Now, I'm not talking about a flood on the scale of like the typical evangelical Christian who invokes Noah's flood as a supernatural event that submerges the entire planet. I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about floods that could wipe out vast regions of the planet. Certainly the kind that I think we have discussed on this show.
Right.
Some of the mega floods that swept over North America, we know that those same scale of mega floods have swept over Asia, have swept over Europe. Whether they're all the same flood or not, I'm not claiming that, but there's certainly enough in magnitude that anybody who survived an event like that could easily believe that the entire world had been destroyed and would have no way of knowing. For example, you know, somebody who'd survived these events at the end of the last ice age in North America would have no way of knowing, you know, who had survived on the other side of the planet. And so it could easily engender myths or stories about the entire world being destroyed. And when we use the term world, I think maybe we differentiate that from planet, because we say world, that could essentially mean, if there was an asteroid impact, say tomorrow, and which even a small one could essentially wipe out modern civilization. It wouldn't cause the extinction of human beings, but it could cause the extinction of modern civilization as we know it. Because basically you could think that even the most advanced countries only have about 6 months of food stockpiled. So if you had 2 years in a row where there was essentially no growing season, that would end civilization as we know it and put people back into the Stone Age. And what it would in effect do, as we could say, would be it ended the world as we know it. You see, so didn't destroy the planet, it didn't cause the mass extinction of humans, but it did end the world, in a sense. You see what I'm saying?
I do, and I wanted to ask you this, because we talk about, floods and the earth and, this massive flood. If all of the ice on both, North and South Poles, if everything melted, every glacier on every mountain, right? If all the ice melted in the world and flooded into the oceans and the lakes and the rivers, the planet doesn't go underwater, right?
No. It would raise sea levels considerably, over 100 feet, and that would be enough to drown massive regions of the Earth's coastline. But here's the thing you got to bear in mind. If you, for example, we're talking the greatest masses of ice on Earth are Antarctica and Greenland.
Right.
If Antarctica melted, and this is something that we could say is analogous to what happened, at the end of the last ice age. You had roughly 6 million square miles of North America buried under ice, right? When that ice all melted, it raised sea level and drowned several million square miles of continental coastline that was exposed because sea levels were 400 feet lower.
Right.
But at the same time, it cleared the ice over half of North America. So what was lost in the rising of sea level was
exposed.
In effect,
yes.
Exposed, right, because the ice melted away. The Greenland ice sheet is a legacy of the last ice age.
Now, and if I'm just fascinated with this subject, and you're the only guy that I know that I can ask these questions. If all of the ice did melt, wouldn't the weight of the water in the oceans force the land to rise in other places too as well? I mean, something's got to give, right?
Yeah, we've actually, I think, had to discuss that somewhat too, because in geophysics you have a phenomena called isostasy, which is sort of a counterpart to continental drift or plate tectonics, which is lateral or horizontal movement of the Earth's crust. But isostasy is vertical movement, and that has to do with the amount of weight. For example, if you go up around Hudson Bay, there are exposed shorelines up hundreds of feet above present sea level, and that's due to isostatic readjustment after the unloading of the massive weight of the ice sheets that covered North America. And my studies into oceanography have suggested that, you'd have a counterbalancing effect on the ocean floors, in that the raising of sea levels would cause subsidence of the ocean floors. And there is considerable amount of empirical evidence to suggest that there has been major subsidence along the ocean floors, particularly focused along the ridge zones, where, for example, the Mid-Atlantic ridge has. There have been quite a number of studies that have suggested that there's been major subsidence along the Mid-Atlantic ridge that was the result of the rapid rise of sea level due to the melting of ice at the end of the Ice Age. We're talking, between 10 and 14 or 15,000 years ago, roughly.
So I feel okay then. It's not like we're going to lose some coastline, but, if you've got a house in the mountains, you've got an even better view. Right, it's going to raise.
As Plato said, when the end of the world is brought about by water, it's usually the people who are near the sea level and the coastlines you get wiped out. And when the world is ended by fire, it's usually the people in the highlands and the mountains that get wiped out.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk some sacred geometry, Randall. Let's actually start at the very, 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 very basics. And for everybody, get your pens out, and this is how we're going to do this. Randall, I want to start with this. What is sacred geometry?
Well, I like to say that it is geometry as we know it, except geometry that we have learned in school, derived mostly from the work of Euclid, is essentially a body of definitions, axioms, propositions, and theorems, by which we start with the simplest forms, a point in space, a line, a surface, and then we progress or evolve towards ever more complicated forms and relationships. Within that, there is no other meaning, juxtaposed onto these forms and the images of geometry. In sacred geometry, you could say what differentiates that is that there is a symbolical component as well, a philosophical component to it. It would draw upon the same principles as Euclidean geometry, with the addition of this other dimension of meaning to it, which is the symbolical component of it, the philosophical. And also the way it perhaps has been utilized through the ages. The term sacred geometry, the earliest that I was able to find the use of that term in English was a 2-volume set, I think it came out in the 1930s by George Lesser, who examined the geometry used by medieval ecclesiastical architects, the builders of the great cathedrals. Mm-hmm. And so he coined the term sacred geometry because it was particularly applicable to the design and building of these sacred structures. It, of course, has been broadened beyond ecclesiastical architecture of the Middle Ages to include all kinds of other things. But what's interesting is that when you get into it and you realize that the system that was used in the Middle Ages was a derivative of much earlier systems that go back, that were employed by the Greeks, that were employed by the Egyptians, that were employed by the Babylonians, by the megalithic builders of stone structures in the British Isles. We also find the same patterns and the same relationships incorporated into what we would call New World architecture. In North America, we find examples of monumental earthwork architecture that seems to display the same principles. And essentially, the usage of it involved the laying out on the ground of a template, and then starting with very simple geometric principles, such as placing a stake in the ground or a vertical pole and tracking the motion of the sun in order to generate a series of angles.
Right.
A rope could then be stretched, or a linked chain, could be stretched from that pole to sweep out arcs, curves, lines, and points of intersection and so forth on the ground. And typically, if you have ever seen, say, a barn raising where the vertical walls are built on the ground and then raised up.
Yep.
So a similar principle would be employed, so that once you've laid out the geometric template on the ground, that would then be used to generate all of the architectural components of the structure, so that the elevations of the structure were related geometrically to the ground plan of the structure. So to make it simple, I think what we would say is that it's in the fact that the forms of geometry, a square, a circle, an ellipse, a triangle, were given philosophical and symbolical connotations, and in the employment of those figures and those patterns towards specifically structures that we would identify as sacred, built for a sacred purpose, whether it was a temple or a cathedral, or whether it was a standing stone ring. And what's interesting about this is once you begin to understand the underlying geometry, you realize that the outer forms can be virtually infinite, but underlying those outer forms is a consistency of pattern and relationship that all can be generated from such things as the intersection of two circles, which when we start looking at some of the images and talking about those, so the listeners can see how the very fundamental operations would begin. And these fundamental operations were universal. So, the idea of a vertical pole as a sacred center was found on all continents throughout for thousands of years. So I think that's kind of what differentiates sacred geometry from secular geometry, which is what most people would be aware of. But what I've tried to inculcate the idea is that, you do have, even sacred geometry is a very rigorous study. And when I have taught sacred geometry in classes and workshops, I go through the whole program of Euclid, starting with the very simplest forms and then moving to ever more complex, first generating the polygons, then from the polygons, the various polyhedra, going up from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. And it's a very rigorous study. Some people seem to think that it's, a lot of woo, but it does require, if you really want to get into it and be able to apply it to real things such as building or architecture or art or sculpture or anything like that, it's a very rigorous study. The entry I discovered a couple of years ago that there's a website called Rational Wiki, and on there basically they have my entry says that Randall Carlson and his sacred geometry woo is all over the internet. And I thought, well, now that's a pretty in-depth understanding of a very complex subject that, worthy of really some of the most venerated scholarship over the years.
Well, if you made it to Rational Wiki, you're a success. Yeah, I just sneezed live on the air. Randall, we have 2 minutes before the break. And
okay.
And what about those that see sacred geometry and assume or think that there may be something occult or hidden also in architecture through geometry that is there in secret?
Well, there's an element of truth to that because, as has been said, as Victor Hugo said, and it's true, the Gothic cathedrals are textbooks in stone. And if you don't, it's secret in the sense that if the average person picked up a book on astrophysics and opened it up and started reading it, it's going to be over their heads and they're not going to get it. In the same way, if you don't have the key to understanding, if you have not mastered the fundamentals, it's going to be secret because you're not going to be able to understand the symbolism. And it is symbolism that's encoded into these structures. And, the thing about secrecy, Jimmy, is that, for many ages, there were times when, there was only politically approved knowledge and ideas that were accepted. And if you went outside the bounds of accepted ideas, you were a heretic and possibly subject to all kinds of bad consequences, including torture and death, if as probably the worst. But the idea there, and this is, what I try to tell people too about the idea of Masonic secrecy. There's no real Masonic secrecy. The secrecy is part of several things. One is that there have been times when being a known Freemason could have been a death sentence, or, it could have brought the charges of heresy. And so you had people who were trying to perpetuate certain knowledge and certain ideas, and it went against the authoritarian political structures of the time. So it had to be perpetuated in secret. And really the word occult is loaded with all kinds of connotations, but really all it means is hidden. And there was a very practical reason for why one wanted to hide knowledge during certain eras. We hide knowledge today. There are certain things that, people who've been sworn to secrecy, who've taken this vow that they will not reveal classified information. If they reveal that classified information, they get into a lot of trouble.
Let's take a break right here. Our guest, Randall Carlson. Now, we're going to do it all tonight, everybody, so just get ready. This is Sacred Geometry 101 right now with Randall. And, Randall, when we come back, let's get started. We'll start. Sure. I'm going to tell everybody we're starting with a dot. Randall gets it, and you will when we return. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station, Salt Lake City, Utah, Van Buren, Arkansas.
Hello, and you're listening to my main man, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Hi, this is Ray Hobbs here, repping the planet, and you're listening to my good friend, Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, on the Game Changer Network and the KGRA Digital Broadcast Station.
This is Toby Kebbell. You're listening to jimmychurchradio.com. Don't hurt me, Jimmy. I'm only little.
Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And this is Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
Yes.
We're of the Honey Brothers. Hey, I'm Adrian Grenier.
And I'm Ari Gold.
We're the Honey Brothers.
And you're listening to Jimmy Church.
The Revolution.
Ancient Life Oil. Life-changing. The real oil. CBD is truly ancient life oil from the source. This oil has no psychoactive effect and is also legal in all 50 states. When you're healthy, you're happy. The truth about this wonderful plant is that it wants to give back to mankind life, longevity, and happiness. Ancient Life Oil are golden grade, all organic, non-GMO, and infused with high-quality liquid coconut oil. It's simple. Just go to ancientlifeoil.com today. That's ancientlifeoil.com. The best, purest, organic, and non-GMO CBD in the world. Go back, Lee Tappy. The statements made regarding these products have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please consult your healthcare professional about potential interactions or other possible complications before using any product. What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go back, Lee Tappy.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to Jimmy Church on Fade to Black, across the globe on the Game Changer Radio Network and the one and only KGRA Radio, The Planet.
All right, welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Simple enough. Randall, Sacred Geometry International is the Twitter handle there. Okay, Randall, let's kick things off here. And before we get to the images, I'd said right at the break that we would start with a dot. Let's start there.
Well, of course, whenever you engage in a geometric construction, the first thing you do is you place a compass on your paper. And that represents the dot. And whether it's, the compass placed on the paper or the pole or staff set into the ground, the idea was that there was a point that it all emanates from. There was an anonymous 18th century Masonic author who said, ante omnia punctum escit, which means before all things there was a point. And that's kind of also a cosmological idea, that the universe began with a singularity.
Certainly. Yes.
And I'm not prepared to say what existed before the singularity, but the idea, again, is that everything emanated from this ultra-concentrated point that represented all things. In the Kabbalah, they call it the Tzimtzum, that the whole emanation of creation is generated from this Zimzum, which is the absolute point, the dimensionless dot in the midst of the absolute, which is understood in the Kabbalistic system to be the condensation or distillation of God's essence. First appears against the background of negative existence, but this background is separated from the absolute, and it is this separation that forms the initial act of manifestation. When you engage in the act of sacred geometry, the clean white paper represents the negative existence. The placing of the compass onto that paper and that single sharp point of the compass placed onto the paper is that first differentiation, because now you have the vast, unlimited negative existence, and now within that you have this ultimate point which contains within it inherent all of creation.
You know what's funny? You, with what you do with architecture and your gig, right, your life, you know exactly what that represents, because I did the same thing. I was a draftsman and a graphic artist for years, and I know the importance of starting everything with a compass on a piece of paper. No matter where you're going to go, you're going to put that compass point at a very specific spot, and then everything generates from there. And it's an easy thing to visualize, but you're absolutely right. Do you think about that now, today, when you start to work? You're probably a CAD guy now, but everything started with a compass, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And really, even though you're doing CAD on computers, the concepts are still the same. The methods are very much similar. The first thing that I will do, if I'm laying out a plan, I use architectural software. The first thing I do when I lay out a plan is I establish my 0 point, my 0 that represents the 0 point on the X, Y, and Z axes. And I always start that just because of Masonic tradition. I always place that in the northeast corner of the structure, because in Freemasonry, the idea was, at least in the northern hemisphere, the northeast corner of any structure will always be the darkest. And so the idea is, when you lay out the structure or you build the structure from that northeast corner, the structure is emerging from the ground, from that point that is established there. It is emerging, and it is moving outwards from the region of darkness into the region of light.
Man,
so it has symbolic, again, so this idea of symbolism that prevails so much in the operations of sacred geometry. So that's what I do when I'm laying out a design. In the software that I use, I always establish that 0 point on the coordinate system, and then I build the structure from there. And then when we produce the plans from that, the plans are handed over to the men in the field, and then they proceed to lay it out. So what they will do is they will drive a stake into the ground that represents that northeast corner. Then they will drive a nail into the top of the stake, so that now we have a very small point relative to the whole structure that's about to be built. That nail that's in the wooden stake that's driven in the ground defines the precise corner. When we are on the in the process of building a structure, we work to a 1/8 inch margin of error. When we get to the more finished work, the trim work, that kind of thing, then we're working to a finer, a 1/16 or even 1/32 of an inch. But for most, structural work, if you're working to within a 1/8 of an inch, you're close enough. So what you can then do is you can hook a line onto that nail, and then you can use that, like typically we'll have a fiberglass tape that has, foot and inch increments on it, and we can hook that tape onto the nail and then stretch out from there and pull off. Let's say we're building a structure that's got a wall, a side length of 40 feet. So then we will hook our fiberglass tape onto that nail, and we will pull off 40 feet, and then we'll mark that in the ground. And we will actually use some of the very same principles and methods to lay it out on the ground as you would to draw the thing on paper, except our compass is now, the stake that's in the ground and is the measuring. We don't use a rope anymore. We use, like I said, a fiberglass measuring tape. But basically, it's the same methods that are used.
You know what's fascinating with that as I'm listening to you? How concerned are you, starting in the northeast corner, if you're building a structure, a Masonic lodge or a house, it doesn't matter, or a commercial building, and you need to build that facing north and east and have it correct, how concerned are you with accuracy?
We're always concerned with accuracy. Now, of course, what I just described is an ideal situation. Sometimes you just can't do it because of the topography or the vegetation or whatever there might be there, that you can't mimic the process precisely. So you have to adapt.
Now,
but always we're working. Like I said, we're working to within. If you're working a structure that might be 40 or 60 or 100 feet on its side, we're working to 1/8 of an inch of accuracy.
And now that you know all of this, and especially with modern technology, I don't want to jump ahead, but I just want to stay focused here. With the Great Pyramid being 1/6 of 1 degree to true due magnetic north, how impressed are you with that?
Oh, I'm totally impressed by that, because now I think a modern surveyor could go out and lay that out with the same degree of accuracy using modern equipment. Now, it's one thing to lay that out, but then to, assemble 2.3 million stone blocks, and because I know that there's even in my experience, there's a difference between, starting out, laying something out in a theoretical level, and then actually implementing that design in 3 dimensionals using materials and, subject to all of the vagaries of trying to work with within time and space, So, if we work in wood a lot, we work in concrete a lot, we'll work with steel somewhat. But, in all of those, there are limitations, especially when you're working with more natural materials. So if you're working with wood, for example, you've got to be prepared to realize that discrepancies are going to creep in between the time you establish that initial point, that initial corner, and the time you hoist the ridge beam and close the structure up. So there's all kinds of opportunities for slight discrepancies to creep in, and they do. Even the best craftsmen are going to admit that there's a little bit of a deviation between the idealized plan and the final completed real-world structure.
Yeah, because even if we don't know how the pyramids were built or who or what or when, we don't know that. But the basic principles, a stake in the ground with some string or rope, and, probably they started the same thing, maybe even in the northeast corner, right? But they did it over, 13 acres.
Right.
It's
profoundly impressive.
Yes.
And that's one of the things, when you look at it, it's like, it's just so inconsistent. Right there, that's the glaring inconsistency with our models of prehistory.
Right. Okay, let's back up. Okay, so we have the single point. What's the next step in sacred geometry?
Well, then it would be, proceeding to lay out the geometric forms. And it usually would start with drawing a circle. Once you've established the point, now what we'll do, and I imagine this has been done traditionally because I've seen, hieroglyphs and stuff showing the architects of old using a plumb bob, but what we'll do is we'll start and we'll establish, what a plumb bob is, and it's tapers to a sharp point, we'll use that plumb bob to establish where exactly, you put the nail. Now, what we do is when we start a project, we lay the whole project out in string. So we set up outside the boundaries of the structure or the building, we erect what are called batter boards, and these are basically stakes driven to the ground with horizontal boards on them that are typically about 3 or 4 feet above the ground, and we will actually lay out in string the perimeter of the structure. And then what we can do is we remove those strings, but they're basically unwrapped from one of the batter boards, wrapped onto one of the others, and the batter boards, we will make little notches in them so that the string, when it's pulled, it goes into that notch, and the notch is just a little saw kerf that's 1/8 of an inch wide, and the string fits nicely in that, and then we can take the string down, we can do our work, and then we'll stretch the string back in order to determine the accuracy of our work. The first thing, of course, when you're building any structure is the footings, because just like any person, you're standing on the ground. If you didn't have any feet on the bottom of your legs, Jimmy, you wouldn't be very stable, would you?
Right.
So in any building starts with footings. And we put those footings in, and the footings are usually concrete. They're steel-reinforced concrete. And what we do is we'll have the string, we'll mark the outer line, the outer edge of the building or structural face. Then we will establish, by hanging a plumb bob off the string, we can determine where that building line is going to be and where we have to place our footings. And once the footings are placed, we create the foundation walls, and the foundation walls are set up so that the exact outer face of the foundation wall, which is usually going to be either poured concrete or concrete masonry units, concrete block, and the outer face of that wall will exactly line up with the string that we have stretched. Once the foundation is done and it's up out of the earth, because when you're working in the earth, that's where you're going to encounter inconsistencies and things that are going to interrupt like we might be trying to lay out a footing and we discover that there's a 5-foot boulder buried in the ground right there. So, you have to make accommodations for those kinds of things. But once the foundation is up out of the earth, then the layout lines, the strings are taken down. We don't need those anymore. Now we work strictly from the plans and, build according to the plans, and everything is referenced off of usually some point, which could be that northeast corner of the structure, and everything is laid out from there. So now we have the foundation, and then usually what we'll then do is we'll cap that foundation with a floor, and now we have a nice flat surface, and we will in effect use chalk lines to draw the pattern upon that flat surface, that subfloor of where the walls and the openings and everything are going to go. So now we've got this flat floor, and on there we'll have a whole series of usually red or blue chalk lines. Some we'll use different colors for different purposes. But if you come up there, you'll see this series of lines that have been imprinted upon this flat floor, and those lines represent the walls and partitions and separations, the window openings, the door openings, and everything that's about to be built on top of that platform that we have just created. And so just like what they did in Egypt was they undoubtedly leveled the platform to a high degree of accuracy before they actually started setting stones. So on a much smaller scale, of course, that's what we're doing. We establish that perfectly level platform. And we have ways that we do that. Even if the foundation walls aren't exactly level, we can then fine-tune. We'll usually use a transit on the project, which will give us easily within a 32nd degree of accuracy. And so we can adjust the floor. Before we attach the floor to the foundation, we will adjust it. It's I guess you could say it's floating, and we will use shims to adjust so that one of the workers will be standing looking through the transit. Through the transit, you'll see crosshairs. Somebody else will have the pole with the measurements, the dimensions on it. And basically, what you'll do is you'll hold that, say, on the corner of the floor that's now floating on the foundation, and you'll have a wedge, which is usually like a long tapered piece of wood, and you can put that between the top of the foundation and the bottom of the floor structure, and then by tapping just slightly, a little bit, you can adjust that floating floor literally to within a 32nd of an inch. And then once it's all leveled out, then we make the permanent attachment to the foundation, and now we have a perfectly level platform upon which to build. And if you have a complicated roof system, you're going to have a big mess on your hands if you don't start from a perfectly level platform.
And that's what's okay. And we're going to come back to this in just a second. We've just posted up image number 1 and image number 2. Image number 2 is the plumb bob. The first image, which is utterly fascinating to me, which is Ancient of Days, right?
William Blake's famous painting of the Ancient of Days, right? That to me, that image sort of captures the whole idea of geometry. Is that, and this is sort of the traditional concept, the ancient concept, is that the universe was created through an act of geometry. And that's what William Blake, what inspired this painting of his, The Ancient of Days. And this is, God reaching down from the heavens, about to turn the compass to impart the angular momentum to the universe. Because when you look at basically the structure of the universe, everything is in motion and everything is spinning. Everything is turning. Everything appears to be orbiting about something else. The Earth is spinning on its axis. The moon is orbiting the Earth. The Earth is orbiting the sun. The sun, with this whole solar system, is orbiting the galaxy. And one of the interesting astrophysical or cosmological questions that, of course, has never been answered and probably never will is, what was the initial impetus for that angular momentum that set everything spinning in this particular fashion? Why isn't everything just random Brownian motion? Instead, there's this order to things, that everything is turning on an axis, spinning about a center, and in the concepts of sacred geometry, as we see exemplified in this particular painting by William Blake, that initial motion was imparted to the universe by God, the geometrician, spinning the compass and setting it in motion.
And image number 2, tell me about this, because I have to say, God measuring the world, right? I said plumb bob, but it's a compass.
It's a compass. Right?
It's a compass. Tell us about this painting, and that's about the most fascinating thing that you can look at, especially with what we're talking about tonight. But tell us about this image.
Well, that's from a medieval. That's the frontispiece to a medieval Bible, and again, it's the act of bringing order out of chaos. You see the thing that God, in this case, symbolized very much like Jesus, is holding this orb in his left hand, holding the compass in his right hand. Within the orb is a bunch of sort of turbulent-looking motion that represents the primordial chaos. The compass is about to bring order out of this chaos.
It's a fascinating.
This particular painting is interesting in itself because it is itself an embodiment of sacred geometry. It's all based upon the ratio of the square root of 2, which is derived geometrically. Once you've established any square, the diagonal of that square to its side will be in the relationship of the square root of 2 to 1. And the square value of the square root of 2 is about 1.414. And it's a little bit less than 1.5. And it's a very remarkable relationship that manifests dynamic symmetry. And I don't know if we're going to be able to explain that because it requires visualization. But the idea here is that if you carefully measure out the dimensions of this particular painting here, what you'll see is that if you take the width of the painting and establish that as a square, the height of the painting would be the same length as the diagonal of that square that would be formed on its width or short side. And this was a particular rectangular ratio that was employed frequently by builders and artists throughout the ages. And the artist who the unknown artist who created this frontispiece to this medieval Bible utilized that root 2 rectangle where the long side is to the short side as the diagonal of a square is to its side, and then using that diagonal to create a rectangle.
And it's beautiful in form, and the thing is, it's pleasing to the eye, but nobody understands why. Right?
No, and here's something else. If you were to actually slice this this particular rectangle horizontally right through the middle,
right,
the two rectangles that would be produced by that are going to have the same proportions as the original.
I know, it's fascinating. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the king's chamber, the floor of the king's chamber, those dimensions the same as this?
No, the king's chamber is a double square.
Oh, it's a double square. Okay.
A double square, yes. But interestingly, if you take the diagonal of the double square, you get the square root of 5. The square root of 5 is the basis for generating the so-called golden section.
That's right, the golden
divine
number.
Proportion.
Right.
So inherent within that double square, it's almost like hiding in there is the golden section.
Unbelievable.
In fact, when you generate the golden section, you start with a double square and take its diagonal. And then you use your compass and you section off one unit, which would be the short side of your double. Like if you have a double square, short side is 1, your long side is going to be 2, right? Because it's a double square.
Right.
You take the diagonal, it's simply, the 47th proposition of Euclid, which says that the square drawn on a hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So using that principle, you would go 1 squared plus 2 squared equals the square of the diagonal. 2 squared, of course, is 4, so 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 is the area drawn on the diagonal, so you take the square root of that, and you get the square root of 5. Anybody who's, rudimentally familiar with mathematics is going to know what I'm talking about.
That's right.
So from that, we get the square root of 5. Then if we use our compass and we strike off 1 unit from that square root of 5, we now generate from there the golden mean, as it's called.
Now, how is it possible? We've got 4 minutes to the break, 3.5. How is it possible? Because Euclid and all of that, and pi and golden numbers, that's thousands of years in the future. How did the Egyptians designers and architects have any idea of this concept? It's not by accident. It cannot be by accident.
Oh, no, and I'm sure they were very familiar with it because, for one thing, it was utilized too frequently. And these relationships are inherent in geometry itself. So anybody who knew how to lay out a square could figure out, well, if we took the diagonal of that square and then we use that as the long side of a rectangle and its short side is the side of the original square, we're going to get this rectangle that has this particular harmonic property such that if we slice it through the middle, we generate 2 additional rectangles that have the exact proportions of the original. If we take either one of those 2, slice it down the middle, we still get another generation of rectangles with the same original proportions. We could go in the other direction. If you look at this image that we've got here in this painting,
right,
and you made 2 copies of it, and you set them side by side so that the long sides were adjacent to each other,
right,
and formed a new rectangle, that new rectangle is going to have the exact proportions of the original painting. So this is harmonics here, and this is what I think they were striving for, so that and if you go and you begin to draw in diagonals and dividing lines within that structure, you're going to get the main axes and orientation lines of the design, of the painting, of the composition. And so by doing that, what you've done is you've created this relationship between the part and the whole, which is the basis of all harmony.
But, okay, now 2 minutes. I'm going to give you 90 seconds to answer this. I'm going to be Michael Shermer for a second. I'm going to be Michael Shermer. But these were Stone Age people with hemp ropes and stone hammers. How could they possibly know anything about squares or geometry?
Well, from my standpoint, the same way we could rediscover. If all knowledge was lost, we could go out and fairly intelligent people could rediscover the principles of geometry because they're so fundamental to everything. But yeah, I mean, we're surrounded by geometry. But the idea is you don't have to have sophisticated technology to put a stake in the ground and use that hemp rope to draw a circle. And anybody who does that, and you can do the same thing on paper or on any flat surface. You could use a nail with string. You don't need to use the compass. You can draw circles, and when you draw those circles, for example, when we get a little further into it, we'll pull up and we'll look at the vesica, which is the fundamental shape of all geometric form, and that will help to explain it, I think.
Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, Randall Carlson, and yes, we are doing it, Sacred Geometry 101. I've got a couple of really good questions that I'm going to hit you with that popped up on Twitter when we come back off of the break. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, and this is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
Way out here, we listen to Jimmy Church.
You're listening to Fade to Black.
Always on the edge of the hottest alternative talk. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. KGRARadio.com.
¿Qué tal, mis amigos? Yo soy Mario Carlson, el tiburón, y los invito para que escuchen a mi buen amigo Jimmy Church Radio. ¡Claro que sí!
Hello, Fadernauts. This is Jimmy Church, and I'm introducing New Pharma, a company whose products are based on science. Human function based on the endocannabinoid system, or ECS. New Pharma firmly believes in this science, and their research indicates that support of the ECS provides the beneficial effects for a healthy lifestyle. New Pharma's science includes relief capsules for pain relief, sleep capsules, which are natural support for occasional sleeplessness. Foundation is support for your ECS, and Fit capsules support your active lifestyle. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2B for a 33% discount on all of their products. Or visit newpharma.com for all of the knowledge on the science. That's GNUpharma.com. Go Beckley Tappy.
Hi, I'm Matt Ray for U.S. Gold Bureau. I cover the market daily. No matter how strong it gets or what long-term predictions say, you can count on one thing as certain. There will be another crash. It will affect your assets. And when it happens, wouldn't you rather be 2 weeks or even 2 months ahead of the curve? Well, Wall Street insiders have been quietly converting their assets into gold for the last few years. Now it's your turn. Buying gold and silver is easier than buying stocks with the U.S. Gold Bureau's Investor Guide. It's free, and you learn how to buy precious metals in or out of an IRA or 401k retirement plan. Your investment shipped directly to your home and is 100% insured and guaranteed. You control your investments and shelter them against the stock market, politics, and unknown threats. Act while your dollar is still worth something. Call U.S. Gold Bureau, 800-885-GOLD. U.S. Gold Bureau, 800-885-GOLD, 800-885-GOLD. Call today.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
Hi, folks. CBD is the home run hitter for health right now. Why, you ask? Because of what it does for the body. Unfortunately, I can't tell you all about the benefit. You know, there's reasons. Do your due diligence and log on to ancientlifeoil.com. That's ancientlifeoil.com. Ancient Life Oil uses organic ingredients and is blended in coconut oil for some of the best benefits. Legal in 50 states and non-psychoactive. Log on to ancientlifeoil.com. That's ancientlifeoil.com.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Oi, oi, I'm Reese Evans. You're listening to Jimmy Church. This is Revolution. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution is on radio. Ciao.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Randall is at Sacred Geometry International. We've got the links right up there on Twitter. And Randall, I can't have you on the show without this question. I knew this was going to pop up, so let's just get it out of the way, and you can answer as quickly as possible. But Georgia and architecture and Randall all go together. But what about the Georgia Guidestones? What's your take on that?
Oh, well, okay. Well, I have a relatively pedestrian interpretation of that, having looked into it years and years ago, and that was that you probably had a group of Masonic-affiliated brothers who wanted to do something to draw tourism to Elberton County because the granite industry was sort of in an economic decline at the time, and I think that they thought that they would weave a mystery around it, and developing a monument, a granite monument, would be an appropriate way to do that. So some of the brothers had probably were familiar with some esoteric teachings involving the Rosicrucians and so forth, and they imported some of that symbolism and imagery into the structure of the monument. And, you know, I don't see any vast occult New World Order conspiracy there. You know, I've had people challenge me on that, but then they don't bring any evidence or proof to the discussion either. So my take, I mean, we could certainly elaborate on that and get into the astronomy of it and the idea that it's really only the first phase of a structure, but you know, a much more elaborate structure that is to be built. And again, I don't know, and nobody really knows. I'm quite sure, unless the identity of R.C. Christian, the original money source of the money for the thing, the funding, and I'm not even convinced that R.C. Christian was a single individual anyway. But my take on it is really that it's very interesting and it's fun, but it's not some, you know, part of some vast New World Order conspiracy.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, I get building it for fun. I could totally get that, but it certainly has freaked out a lot of people. I think the large part for that is the population control aspect of it. But if it was done for fun, that's one thing, but it certainly did open up some eyes and cause a lot of conspiracy theory.
Well, yeah, and that the one statement on there about maintaining the global population, interestingly, when that was built in the early 80s, I was about maybe 4 or 5 years into my studies of global catastrophes, having read, you know, there's what was the limited amount of stuff that was available back in the 70s. So when that, I think, was actually, built in 1980, when that came out, that was my first take on it, was that somebody else had been, had been looking at some of the same material that I had looked at and was looking at the time, and concluded that perhaps that might be a realistic population in the aftermath of a global catastrophe, and that was what it was referencing. That's how I took it initially, not that there was some secret conspiracy to start killing off, you know, large segments of the Earth's population. Because first of all, the New World Order whole thing, I mean, we could have a talk about that. It's one of the things that I'm sort of a Michael Shermer on that one. I think that there is conspiracies, certainly, but history is filled with conspiracies. You know, my study of history would suggest to me that oftentimes even the elites are at odds with one another, and that there's no one grand conspiracy. And I know that probably some of the listeners have convinced themselves that there is. You know, I've been basically looking for evidence of one unified, consistent grand conspiracy for 40 years and have not found it. Now, there are many much smaller conspiracies. Absolutely, there are conspiracies. There's, you know, we could talk about some things that have happened in American history recently that I certainly accept that are conspiracies. I don't think that has anything to do whatsoever with the Georgia Guidestones, though. I think that basically what you had there was somebody who had knowledge that was fully available at the time. You know, you had the work of people like Alexander Thom and Fred Hoyle, who had done research onto the astronomy of the megalithic structures. You had knowledge available about cyclical catastrophes in Earth history. And I think somebody just drew upon that and came up with some ideas and raised about $500,000 to build the thing. I'm thinking if there was some grand New World Order conspiracy, they could have come up with a lot more resources and funds than they actually did, because the amount of money and resources that was utilized to pay for the thing was certainly within the reach of one person.
I've got a great question here.
Okay.
Please ask Randall. Somebody has jumped ahead, but it's a great question. Please ask Randall if fractal geometry of the paintings is suggestive or a clue that they understood the holographic nature of the universe.
I would certainly consider that as an interesting possibility. I don't necessarily think that we could make that conclusion from, and it is correct, I think, to describe these structures and these compositions as fractal in the sense that they have a self-similar quality to them. And that's kind of what we were getting to discussing about earlier when I was saying how we could utilize this particular rectangle here and it's self-replicable. It could be, we could replicate the proportions of this particular rectangle of this painting we've been looking at, either contracting or expanding, and it'll maintain a constant constant of proportionality as long as we follow the basic fundamental rules. And then the idea is that you can subdivide these particular family of rectangular forms, such this, we would call this a root 2 rectangle, because its long side relationship of long side to short side is the square root of 2 to 1. The root 3 rectangle, which generates from the vesica, which we'll talk about in a minute. Then the root 4 rectangle, which is the double square, which we've already discussed briefly in regards to the king's chamber. And then the root 5 rectangle, from which we can derive the golden section. And so all of these particular family of forms are self-replicable, and they can be divided in such a way that the smallest part can reflect the pattern of the whole. And so, yes, they do have this property of fractal self-similarity. Now, I think it's interesting that this does lead us into this idea of kind of a holographic universe by extending this into the third dimension and possibly into the dimension of time, which we can talk about if we don't run out of time, as far as this particular interview goes. But, I don't know if I don't think we could necessarily demonstrate that the one followed the other. But at the same time, who knows? I mean, I'm open, if somebody presents me a coherent, logical, well-thought-out argument with evidence and data and so on, I'm certainly open-minded about it. At the same time, though, where I've looked at this, I see it, the fractal self-similarity shows up in a lot of sacred structures where the divisions of the overall system reflect the proportions of the whole. And that is what leads us to the ancient concept of harmony.
Well, let's discuss image number 4, which correct proportion, black and white.
Yes, this is from Atalanta Fusions, which was I think 16th century alchemical text. And if you start looking into some of the old alchemical texts, they're filled with geometry. I mean, that's because the idea was the geometry was the basis for the whole operation. And if you didn't have the correct proportions of materials, if you didn't have the correct proportions of the timing of the various operations, you would not succeed in creating the Philosopher's Stone. So this particular image basically is entitled Correct Proportion is the key to breaking down the wall of mystery. And the brick wall represents this wall of mystery that conceals the inner teachings of the Hermetic tradition. And here's the alchemist using these big old compasses to create this geometric form. And we see a circle. We see it contains an isosceles triangle, and within that isosceles triangle is a square, and then inscribed within that square is the circle, and it contains the male and female figures, which represent the bipolar forces that are to be reconciled or unified as a result of the alchemical operation.
Fascinating image. Fascinating.
Yeah, isn't it, though?
Just unbelievably great. And then I want to, as we continue here, I do want, because it's, again, related, I want to jump up to image number 5.
Well, this is also from an alchemical text, about the same period as the previous one. Yes, this rebus, essentially in alchemical concepts, it's the divine consummation of the work, which is considered to be, in a sense, fractal, because what the alchemist is attempting to do in their laboratory, in their athanor, the vessel of transmutation, is duplicating the process whereby essentially the universe was created, duplicating the process whereby life was generated out of the inert matrix of the universe, and how consciousness and self-cognizance is then generated out of the matrix of biological form. In this particular image, we see that the whole thing is surrounded by an oval, which is egg-shaped, which is an act of geometry in itself, because there is a way of creating a variety of ovals and ellipses which involve placing the compass at various points.
That is right.
So you'll notice that the very top of it is the arc of a circle, but the bottom is not. What you actually have here is for the top arc has its point of center, the bottom arc has a point of center, which is actually, if you look at the circle, that's the quadrature with the dashed lines dividing that circle into 4, with the center and that dot is the center of the bottom arc, you see.
Yes.
And then there are 2 more arcs that complete the egg. Now, within that egg, you have the rebus, so you have a male half and a female half conjoined in unity, which is the same idea. So the previous image essentially shows the early stages of the alchemical work. This shows the final stage, the divine consummation, which is what the word rebus translates to in alchemical meaning. And here you see the male half and the female half conjoined. They've now been, they are equal status in the creative act. The male half holds the compass, the female half holds the square.
Mm-hmm.
And then surrounding them over in the arch, as you saw, you have the figures of Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, the Moon, the Sun, and Venus. Mercury is actually the one directly overhead that's in the star over that comes right between the faces of the anthropomorphic faces, and those represent the 7 visible planets, each which were endowed with certain attributes and symbolic meanings that would be clear to an alchemist who had studied these things. The dragon has multiple meanings. For one thing, in mythology, the dragon was a dual creature. It had not only a terrestrial life in that it usually would dwell in caves and so on. It could also come out and fly and arch up to the sky. So, just like for anybody who saw the Hobbit movies, the dragon in there, he lived inside the mountain, but he ultimately came out to try to destroy the world. And the dragon has symbolized a number of things over the ages. For one thing, it has symbolized the energies of the earth itself, the telluric forces, if you want to call it that. A more modern sense might be the fluctuating geomagnetic field, the idea that the motion of the tectonic plates can generate patterns of force and energy that were actually utilized by ancient people. And this could be a whole other discussion that we could get into, discussing the geomantic dimension of the ancient structures, because many of these structures were all built. Now, I digress here for a minute. In the work of Guy Underwood, Pattern of the Past, he was a geomancer who basically made a living by finding water using traditional dowsing type means. And he was also familiar with geological techniques of tracking water motion through the crust, And one of the things he did, he spent many years studying the correlation between the cathedrals in Europe and the pattern of underground water. And over again, he was able to document that there was this correlation, this pattern of water motion through the crust that these ancient builders seemed to be aware of. Now, I know that in our more rationalist society, I've seen lots of basically criticism and skepticism about the idea of geomancy or water dowsing, that kind of thing. Yet my own experience has been rather interesting. I have been building, for many years, and back in 1975, I think it was, I was building a pole barn. And to build the pole barn, I had 3 rows of 5 telephone poles each. So what I did was I went out and I prepared the site, I leveled the site, I went out and I drove a stake in each of the places that I wanted a pole to be set. Now, the poles that I had were telephone poles that we had bought through, I guess they had been discontinued use by the phone company here in Georgia. So what I did was I staked out, I had 3 rows of 5 stakes each. Each one was where I wanted a hole dug to place the poles. So then I call Ma Bell, who was the phone service provider back then. They send out their auger truck, and then they use the auger. They'll drill the hole, and then they will use their boom and to set the poles in the holes. Well, interestingly, I had heard of water dowsing, but had never really had much interest in it or looked into it. But the truck comes up, and the 2 guys in the phone company uniforms, khaki phone company uniforms, come up, and then this 3rd guy gets out, and he's this real tall guy, about 6'5", 6'6", skinny guy. I can still picture him. He had coveralls on and an old beat-up hat, and he comes out, and he had something in his hand. He had some kind of a case in his hand. He walked down to where I had placed the stakes. He opened his case, and he took out dowsing rods, and then he walked back and forth over each of the stakes that I had driven with his dowsing rods, and as he did, he would walk over them and he would shout up to the guys at the truck, clear, that this one was clear. They could go ahead and they could dig here. I'm standing over on the side. My first impression was these guys are pulling my leg, right?
Right.
Well, I happen to know that the water main into the property, where it came across the road and passed under the driveway going to the main house. Well, so I'm watching this, and he's got, basically all he's got is he's taken these old telescoping automobile antennas that have the ball on the end,
right,
and he's turned them 90 degrees, so he's got the sleeve in his hands, and they're free to pivot. Well, he comes walking across in my direction. I was building a boat dock at the time, so I'm watching this whole thing because it's right next to a river, right?
Were you tripping out? Were you tripping? I mean,
I was not tripping. No,
not high on drugs. I'm saying, were you just like, what is he for real?
Yes, that's exactly it. Right. That was my state of mind at the time. Like, what the hell is going on here? What are these guys doing?
Right.
Well, so then he comes walking across the driveway, and as he gets to the spot right where I knew roughly where the water main was coming in, as he steps across there, it was literally as if somebody grabbed the ends of those rods, bent them. They actually bent, and they swung into an X, and they crossed. It was literally like somebody had grabbed the ends of them, bent them down under tension, and then crossed them. Then he stepped across that zone, and as he stepped across, the rods relaxed and began to swivel freely like they had been before. What he then did was he walked back and forth in a zigzag pattern, and each time he would walk across, the same phenomena would happen. The rods would cross and they would bend, and then he would step across, and so then he traced out where the water main came in to the property. The guys in the truck proceeded to go down and with their auger and proceeded to drill where he said that they could drill. So I ended up talking to him about it, and he'd been doing that for them for years. And then he asked me if I was wanted to try it, and I was feeling very self-conscious about it, and the other two guys were paused and looked. So I took his rods in hand. I stepped across, and it was literally like I got an electric shock.
No.
And I've tried dowsing since then and have not gotten anywhere near that. I think it had something to do with my state of mind, because it was so surprising to me and unexpected that I would get that feeling, and it was literally like the feeling was that somebody grabbed the ends of these rods in their hands, and I was able to trace out where the water main was. Now, I've tried dowsing quite a few times since then with a little bit of success, but never like that first time. Now, I also knew somebody that was in Vietnam that told me, he was a Marine in Vietnam. Now, this is years ago. I don't even remember his name. We were neighbors. And he told me that they used dowsing in Vietnam to find mines that had been buried. So, and I had no reason to doubt him that he wasn't making this up, because we were probably talking about dowsing and the idea of there being energies in the earth that might be correlated with the pattern of underground water motion. But then he said something to the effect, well, you can use more than just water, because in Nam, we had guys that would use dowsing to try to find mines. Wow. And apparently with some success, because you figure, okay, if Ma Bell comes out to dig holes to place telephone poles, and they dig where there happens to be a water pipe, that's going to cost them a lot of money. But they apparently had enough confidence in this guy's skill.
And you witnessed it, though. That's the thing, and you did it yourself. I've always been on the skeptical side of the fence when it comes to dowsing. I'm open-minded about everything, but the people that are good at dowsing, we're getting into a zone of fact, right? The unsuccess versus the success far outweighs it. And so there's something going on. I don't know what it is, though. I really don't. It's a fascinating area. Before we hit the break, I wanted to jump ahead to these the two Asian illustrations that you have here. One of is Fu His and Nu Kwa. What's going on with this image before we get to the creation, which is kind of elemental and basic?
Yeah.
But
well, you'll notice you got some of the same themes going on here as in the previous image. You've got a male and female half conjoined. The female half is holding a square, the male a compass. In addition to the square, we see a plumb bob hanging from the square, which is kind of like the third tool that you would use in laying out your sacred structure. We see the constellations arrayed around. We can see the Big Dipper. We can see Pegasus, what might be Cassiopeia, what might be Gemini. It's been defaced enough that it's difficult to identify them. Then you've got the ring of 12 up top, which I would interpret as, being zodiacal. And then you've got this large wrapped intertwined serpentine tail, which represents, I think, would suggest anyway, for purposes of discussion and experimentation, that this represents the same force as the dragon in the previous image does. And again, the thing about the dragon is it has a component of both terrestrial and a celestial component. And we could spend a whole other discussion on the symbolism of the dragon and what it implies, because I have a whole lot of interesting material on the geological connection with sacred architecture and the cosmological or astronomical realm. And those are integrated. Those two realms are integrated. And the thing that I was finally going to say was about Guy Underwood's work in Pattern of the Past was he showed that there was a very high correlation between the pattern of sacred structures on the surface of the earth and the pattern of underground water below. Many of the structures were placed over what had previously been sacred springs, like Chartres Cathedral, for example, was built on a knoll, and there was a sacred spring there. There was once a sacred spring at the center of Stonehenge, but I think early in the 20th century, because people kept throwing trash in there, the UK government went out there and plugged it with concrete or some such thing. But many of these ancient structures correlate with the pattern of underground water, which to me is a very interesting and fascinating subject for exploration. Go ahead.
I've got about 30 seconds. What's the date? What's the circa on this image here?
If memory serves me correct, I think it's about 11th century.
11th century. So there is
about 800 years ago, maybe.
And a huge dating difference between the two images, but yet they represent nearly the same exact symbology. But this is what I see here, Randall. You see a serpent. I see DNA. But that's just me. That's just me.
Not just you, Jimmy.
We'll be right back. More with Randall. Okay. More with Randall Carlson. We're doing Sacred Geometry 101. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
Hi, everybody. This is Rob Halford, the Metal God, on geometrician.com.
This is KGRA Digital Broadcasting Station. Salt Lake City, Utah. Van Buren, Arkansas.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on the smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Your contact for current news and trending topics. KGRAradio.com.
Do you worry a lot? If you're forgetful, nervous, moody, or overwhelmed, chances are you're not protecting yourself from the ravaging effects of stress and anxiety. No matter the cause, ongoing stress and elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol can rob your memory, your health, your quality of life, and your future. Now you can combat the effects of stress and anxiety while improving your memory and recall at the same time with the dietary supplement Calm and Clever. Studies show that the ingredients in Calm and Clever reduce cortisol by as much as 30% in as little as 1 to 2 weeks and increase your ability to recall facts, names, and numbers in 4 to 12 weeks. Calm and Clever was created by scientist Kurt Hendricks, a principal investigator in 2 NIH-funded studies on Alzheimer's disease. Try Calm and Clever for 2 months. You'll feel the difference. Call 1-800-758-8746 or go to calmandclever.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of Fade to Black by just calling 605-562-4482. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Just call 605-562-4482. You can listen to me, Jimmy Church, on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Go Beckley Tappy.
You want to know a secret? I love ponies. I really love ponies. I'm serious. I couldn't stay sane without ponies to brush.
Why fade to black? Because you never got that pony, damn
it. This is Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
All right, Welcome back, Fade to Black. Oh, man, what a show tonight. Randall Carlson, Sacred Geometry 101. We're going through the images that are in the gallery here. And, Randall, what's fascinating with the number 6, which is Fu, His, and Nuqua, I see DNA with that. But to have the male, the feminine and the masculine with the square, the plumb bob, the compass, again, the zodiac connections here, the constellations, fascinating image, but it's nearly identical to the alchemical references. Yeah. I mean, just unbelievably the same, except I see DNA. And one's going to say, Jimmy, come on, DNA in the 11th century. That's what I see here. I don't see a serpent. Well, I guess they could be the same thing anyway.
Well, Jimmy, what if the serpent was oftentimes used or sometimes used as a symbol for DNA? Now, of course, this would invite the derision of the skeptics, but I think we have to be open. And part of the implication of when you get into these kind of studies is that we have to be open to a completely altered version of what we think we know about the past.
Now, I want to jump ahead and go to creation as written in Zen calligraphy. And I'm going to say this. When you go to art school and you go through art classes, right here, this image here, this is where you start your classes, whether it's fine art, industrial design, whatever you're doing, you look at these three: the square, the triangle, and the circle. And when I had my first little design studio, this was my logo, and I thought I was being creative, right? But every art student in the world also used this for their logo for their first, because it is the basics of the basics. When was this dated?
This, I'm not sure. I think this has been utilized quite frequently. Robert Lawler introduced this idea. It's probably relatively contemporary, but I think it has ancient roots. And since you brought up classes, before I forget, I do want to mention that Cameron over at Sacred Geometry International is doing an equinox sale, and we have got some online classes that take people through the operations of sacred geometry, starting from the very simplest, working up more and more complex, and he is offering a really good deal on that.
And tell him, he's listening right now, tell him to post it in Twitter, and we will bust it out on all of social media right now. Tell him to quit playing around. He's listening to us right now.
Yeah, Cameron, quit playing around.
Quit goofing.
Quit goofing around. Put this out there, man. Yeah. No, he's got some juicy stuff over there, and so I would please invite people to go check it out and see what he's offering, because he's really got some good deals.
Yeah, he's a pretty smart guy too. You know what I wanted to ask you? And we've been talking about crop circles over the last couple of months, more than we usually do. But the more that I look at crop circles, all I see is, I don't know where the intelligence comes. I don't know who's designing them. I don't know if it's extraterrestrial or if it's a couple of brainiacs from London. I don't know. But it takes sacred geometry to a whole nother level. When you look at some of these complex crop circles, are you impressed?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, I'm impressed. And, I waver back and forth. In my more skeptical moments, I'm thinking, well, what you have is a team. I think about oftentimes my own way of making a living and going out with a team, with our instruments in hand and doing this thing. And I'm thinking, if I'm going to take the more reductionist point of view, yeah, you've got this team that's worked out this stuff really elaborately. But then in my, at other times I'm thinking, yeah, but how the hell do they do this without getting caught?
Right. I know. It blows my... Now, okay, let me ask you
Unless
this.
they're out there, with infrared goggles and they can actually see, and, to pull something like that off, you would have to rehearse it. You would have to go through the motions repeatedly, because if you're going to go out there and do this thing in a matter of hours...
With no mistakes. No mistakes.
Yeah. And it's just like, typically if we're going to build a house, we might take 3 or 4 months. But if you plan ahead, and you may have seen some of this where, you get the crews, everybody's ready, everything is in place, they slam it and they build a house in 24 hours, right?
Right.
Well, that took, it took many, many, many more than 24 hours to prepare to build a house in 24 hours. So, having looked at that process, I think, well, now, is that how we could explain the crop circles? And to be frank, I don't know.
I know. And look, you said earlier, need to drive this home. A stake and a piece of string, you can get a lot done. And I look at these crop circles, and it's obvious, right? And I'm thinking every time a stake, a piece of string, and somehow getting this done. With you and your team, with all of your knowledge in the design, could you pull off a crop circle like some of these elaborate ones? Could you pull it off yourself?
Well, let me put it to you this. If I and my team spent maybe a year or two training in all of the techniques and had mastered them, maybe, I don't know. I never really thought about that. But, I'm also thinking, we have graduated up from using simply string to, where we use lasers now. We have a laser instrument that we will use that we can, do all of our layout with. We'll use our laser to level things and to sight things and line things up precisely. So I'm thinking that if I was going to attempt that, so maybe if there's anybody out there that wants to fund a research project, we could see what we could pull off. I don't know. Maybe so. Clearly, if somebody is actually doing it, though, they certainly know some geometry.
They do, and this is the trippy thing. They're not using lasers. They're not even using flashlights, or they would be seen. I can imagine a Hollywood production with floodlights and light-alls and 30, 40 people and but no, that's not what's going on. Otherwise, we would see it and it'd be on videotape and it would be story over, right? That's it. Close the book on that. All right, let's go to probably the most famous image on everything that you said, which is image number 8, the Masonic logo, the square and the compass.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know it's fundamental, but take us through this.
Well, it is fundamental. It's the two instruments of geometry, and you've got a compass set at 60 degrees, and then you have the square, which is the right angle of 90 degrees. And in the fundamental operation of sacred geometry, which is the creation of the vesica, which is the overlap of two circles, which if we have time to get into a few more images, we'll see that. You can basically generate both the equilateral triangle and the square. And in the previous image that we were looking at, the Zen calligraphy, I might mention that it's read from right to left. So the circle is the most fundamental form, then the equilateral triangle follows from that, and then a rectilinear form, which is the more complex form, follows from that. So it kind of, the pattern of the Zen calligraphy mimics sort of the process of creation and the process of geometry, whereby you start with the simplest form, which is a circle, which is a circumference in a center, and from that you can get an equilateral triangle. And the reason is that by whatever coincidence of reality, it just so happens that the radius of a circle will exactly step off the circumference 6 times. So the division of anybody who is able to draw a circle by means of a compass, and you could make a compass very simply, just like in some of the previous images, by essentially just the compasses that we sell or that we include with the sacred geometry class are basically 2 pieces of wood held together with a clip. And it's a relatively simple affair, but it's very effective. And again, you can use a piece of string with a stake in the ground. But the idea is that if you draw a circle, anybody could then further experimenting or playing with it could discover that, if you step off the radius of that circle, start at any point on the circumference, and walk it around, it'll exactly step off the circumference 6 times, producing a hexagon. And from that hexagon, now if you begin to connect, if you connect one point, skip a point to the next point, skip a point to the next one, and then go back to the original point, you'll have an equilateral triangle. If you do that again, you'll have the hexagram, which is the six-pointed star,
right,
which is, the
Star
symbol of
David.
Judaism.
Right.
Yeah. And so here in this particular figure, basically what you've got is the compass with which you can draw the circles, and you've got, and it's set at 60 degrees, which is the equilateral triangle, and then you've got the 90-degree square. But in the philosophy of sacred geometry, the ultimate act of geometry is the reconciliation of square and circle. It's called the squaring of the circle, right? And because based upon the mathematics, you can have an exact measurement for one, but not the other. In other words, and generally a square is considered an emblem of rationality and anything that is finite and measurable because of the fact that the very rational relationship between the sides of a square and its perimeter. Whereas with the circle, you don't have this rational relationship. You could express the circumference as a whole number, but then the diameter is not a whole number. Or vice versa. Usually you take the diameter, if you take the diameter as one unit, which is the unit circle, then the circumference is going to have the value of pi, which is a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal number, which we call an irrational number. And the previous numbers that we talked about, like the square root of 2, that defined that the painting of God, striking out the universe with the compass,
right.
That is also an irrational number. It starts out 1.4142, 13562, but then it goes on forever. And so anybody using it will have to basically round off at some point, just like you round off pi, usually to 1.314 if you're going to use pi. But the interesting thing, though, about the irrational numbers is that even though when you try to express them mathematically, you cannot set them up as a fraction. You can't set the diameter of a circle and then the circumference of a circle in a fraction where you've got integers in both numerator and denominator. But in geometry, you can actually get the exact relationships, even though you can't or as close as you can draw, but you can't express them mathematics. They're irreconcilable mathematically. In other words, irrational. And so what we have here in this is the reconciliation of square and compass, which is the squaring of the circle, which is sort of the hidden meaning of this particular image here. And the squaring of the circle, again, represented the ultimate reconciliation of opposing forces in the universe. So measurable versus immeasurable, finite versus infinite, rational versus irrational, those concepts like that. So the circle was usually considered to be a symbol of the heavens. The square was taken to be a symbol of the earth. In the reconciliation of the opposing forces of circle and square, it also represented the summum bonum of the alchemical operation, which was the linking of heaven and earth, which is the basic axiom of alchemy, which is as above, so below.
Let's get to the Vesica before we start to run out of time here. Very important image.
Yeah, the next figure shows an elaboration of the Vesica, which if you look carefully, you'll see that there's two circles overlapping, and they overlap in such a way that the circumference of one falls on the center of the other. And anybody could draw this. This wouldn't take an advanced technology. All it would take would be, like we talked about, a stake and some string. So you basically draw one circle, and then you move your center of your compass or your stake or whatever to the circumference of that first circle you drew, and then you draw a second circle of the same exact diameter. And then it's the overlap of those two circles that forms the Vesica, which basically means a vessel. And the Vesica was considered to be a feminine symbol, and it was often associated with the vagina and with the womb. And it's interesting because it's out of the Vesica that emerges the full, all the generations of geometry emerge from the Vesica. All the complex forms come out of that Vesica. starting with the equilateral triangle, then moving to the square, then moving to the pentagon, then the hexagon, the seven-sided, the nonagon, the octagon. All of these can be generated starting with the fundamental form of the vesica.
I remember back in art school as well, when we were looking at the vesica, that all design, everything can come from a vesica. And I remember one of my art teachers saying, a car could not be designed without the vesica. Everything that you see is represented here. And it's a mind-blowing concept, but then when you start to look at it, it can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and everything is represented right here.
Yes, that would be an accurate interpretation of it, absolutely. And so that overlap, that's the vesica, it's the vessel. Interestingly, it has sort of also a ship-like form to it. And when a lot of the Gothic cathedrals are based upon the proportion of a vesica. Chartres is a prime example where the length to width ratio of the cathedral is the same as the length to width ratio of the vesica, which, by the way, happens to be the square root of 3. So if you look at this figure that we've got up here, the long vertical axis, let's say this, if the horizontal axis is 1, then the long vertical axis is the square root of 3, the irrational number, the square root of 3. And since all of science derives from mathematics, and all of mathematics derives from geometry, and all of geometry derives from the vesica, you can see that, yes, your art instructor was absolutely correct in saying that it all starts with this figure right here.
That's right. It's so important. And now let's go to... which is really cool. Let's go to image number 10, the cover of the Chalice Well, because what are we looking at here?
Well, here we see it. This was designed by Bly Bond in the early 20th century, who had studied deeply into the mysteries of alchemy and the Holy Grail. And, of course, Glastonbury is associated with the Grail traditions. And so this is a very suitable form to be on the lid to the sacred well. And again, going back to our discussion about the idea of water being associated with these sacred sites, Glastonbury Abbey was built over a site of underground water, which emerged at the surface at this well. And this was the cover of the well, of the Chalice Well. And traditionally it had always been called the Chalice Well, and in this case the chalice being referenced is none other than the Holy Grail, which was this figure, which was this image that we've got from these medieval romances written in the late 11 and early 1200s, referring back to earlier events and full of very interesting imagery, very potent stuff. And, I mean, we could devote a whole discussion just to the Grail imagery. A lot of overlap between the Grail stories and the traditions of alchemy and Hermeticism. Lots of parallels there. But, basically the idea in the Grail stories was that the land had fallen into waste. The fertile kingdom had become a wasteland at the same time that the king had become debilitated and incapacitated. And the Grail was the secret to restoring not only the health of the king, but restoring the wasteland, restoring the land to fertility and fecundity. And I have strongly believed for a long time now that the Grail symbolism represents this, what we might think of as a lost technology for the restoration of a landscape devastated in the wake of a catastrophe, to accelerate the recovery of that landscape by utilizing these subtle forces that are also now demonstrated empirically to have a relationship to biological activity. And again, this could be a whole other discussion we could have sometime. But I think if we move, let's see, what's the next image?
Yeah. I just want to, I'm going to thank Cameron out of the gate here for actually getting his job done. Well done, Cameron. It's all out there now. He's obviously listening. It's very cool. Okay. The next image, and we've got about 7 minutes to the bottom of the hour. The next image, Buddha. Okay, yeah, let's go
Buddha.
right here.
Well, here's Buddha seated within the Vesica. And this has parallels with the Christian tradition because, as we're going to see, I think the sequence of images got a little out of order, but if we move through them, we'll be able to see, because in many of the facades of the cathedrals, Jesus is always depicted seated within a Vesica. And it basically conveys the same ideas that we see right here with Buddha seated within the Vesica. The idea that the teacher, the master, because in another way, even as the womb is considered to be a doorway or an aperture between two dimensions of being or existence, so is the Vesica. It's also thought of as a doorway or an aperture between worlds. And so the fact that Buddha or Christ is seated within the gateway, within the aperture between these worlds, is highly significant.
Now,
go?
Let's jump over. Well, we're going to come back to the cathedral with the arches because I want to jump to the Vesica with the pyramid. And what's interesting here, Rita, this is I think this is image 13. Is this the ratio of the Great Pyramid? Just tell me now, blow my mind.
Yes, it is.
Oh man. Okay, take us through this. This is absolutely mind blowing because it looks perfect. It is, isn't it?
Well, there's yes and no. I mean, it's so close that if you were to use this to lay out a structure, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the idealized structure based upon this pattern and the actual structure sitting on the Giza Plateau.
Now, what's the degree that I'm looking at here? What are the degrees on the sides of this pyramid?
Well, it's very close to 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 51.8.
Wow.
Roughly. It's very, very, very close. And this, you can see that it's actually, you start with the Vesica, you can see the overlap of the two circles. You see the rhombus within the inner Vesica that has the root 3 dimensions. And then the two circles let's say this, Jimmy, we establish the inner Vesica has a width of 1 unit. Now we can see that the two circles forming that are 3 times that, so it's 3 units in width. And then we have a large outer Vesica enclosing that. We then use the height of the inner Vesica, and we erect a perpendicular at one end, in this case at the bottom end of the rhombus, and we extend that base out until it intersects the outer arcs of the large Vesica. And then, as you can see, we construct those lines back to the other end of the rhombus at the top point of the Vesica, and that gives us the profile of the Great Pyramid.
Beyond coincidence?
I don't know if I would dismiss this as coincidence. But there's actually several geometric ways of deriving that cross-section of the Great Pyramid, which to me is really very interesting. And we don't have time, or I didn't provide the imagery to examine some of the other ways. But again, what this does show is this Vesica as the vessel, or the womb out of which all of this form can be generated. And here we see as an example, I included this because it is an example of even the profile of the Great Pyramid can be generated out of it.
Well, now this is, what's your determination of how they came up with the angles for the Great Pyramid? Did they generate it through geometry like this, or did they do it out of necessity to keep that thing from falling over?
Oh, well, I think, interestingly, the angle is very structurally stable. But, yeah, I think it's just loaded with geometric symbolism, and I think that was the intent, to show that here is a structure that encodes the relationship of pi, it encodes the relationship of phi, or the golden section, because if you look at this diagram right here, let's go over to the right base of the pyramid, where that angle meets the outer arc. If we follow that diagonal line up to the apex of the pyramid, and then we follow it along the base until it meets the middle vertical axis. That long side is to that half the base in the golden section relationship. So there it is right there.
Right.
So we've not only included the square root of 3, we've also now included the golden section within one diagram here.
Yeah, and again, I can't... You may say, Randall, that's fine. String, stake, you're able to do this. This is just simple stuff with objects and triangles and arches and squares, and they were able to do this, with a creative process back then. I look at this and I see high technology, high intelligence. I don't see anybody drawing this stuff out in the sand and coming up with something that looks cool. No, I think this is way beyond that. I really do. I consider this non-Euclidean geometry of, high intelligence.
Yeah, because, see, you can take this the next step. What we're looking at here, in a sense, Jimmy, is like a two-dimensional cross-section. You have to picture that you can also understand these circles as being spheres.
Yes.
And that these two spheres are intersecting in this same geometric relationship, and so therefore the rhombus that is formed within the vesica is now a three-dimensional form. I'm with you on that. I'm open to on the one hand, you could do it with very simple technological means, but within it, though, is this very sophisticated knowledge of geometry and astronomy and possibly, like we were talking about earlier, geology. And what strikes me as I read through the various myths from many cultures, many lands, many times, one of the consistent themes is the idea of these outsiders who came in with this advanced knowledge and taught this knowledge to these various cultures. I mean, whether you're talking about the Babylonians or the Egyptians or the Celts or Native Americans or the Mayans, the Chinese, they've all got this idea of whatever you want to think of them as the gods or whatever, who had some kind of knowledge and were able to impart this knowledge. And, and all of this stuff that we see, this legacy of these ancient cultures is what we inherited from that connection. Whatever that connection is, excuse me, a dog just walked by and stepped on my foot.
That's okay. Well, actually, we just blew past our last commercial break. Let's do. Let's take that commercial break now, Randall. I'm going to hold you over for another 10 minutes, and we'll do the last two images and then say goodnight. And absolutely fascinating conversation. So let's do that right now. Sacred Geometry 101 with Randall Carlson. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us.
Listening to my boy, Jimmy Church, on jimmychurchradio.com.
Despite popular opinion, reading a book will not make you smarter.
But listening to Jimmy Church will.
So you went to dinner last night, you had your favorite pasta. Ugh. Or maybe you had a heavy, spicy meal and it left you. Ugh. GetTheT.com. Maybe you mowed down a huge steak and your plumbing is all plugged. Ugh. GetTheT.com. Our super strength tea will take care of your occasional. Ugh. It's all organic and non-GMO. Get rid of We have so many great supplements, but our super tea is number one. GetTheT.com. That's GetTheT.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
When you take the beans from Central America with dashes of Indonesian and African mixed in and then roasted to the dark side of fade to black, you create the ultimate brew of fringe. Introducing the Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Yes, River Moon's darkest customized roast was created for the love of Fade to Black. The alchemy of masterful roasting and smoking the beans is in every sip of this full-bodied, dark Java. I need my coffee dark, deep, with distinct bittersweet chocolate highlights, just like the bunker. Leaning further into the darkness of the roast is Fade to Black blend from River Moon Coffee. Just click on the banner at jimmychurchradio.com and use the promo code F2BBLEND for 15% off of your order today. Go Beckley Teppy.
I'm Matt Ray with America's First News. We all know if you're planning a trip, you should shop and compare, right? But why endlessly search the web when you don't have to? Flight Services helps you find the lowest possible airfare. Talk directly to a travel pro right now for the best deals available. Their travel pros have additional discounts not found on websites, and Flight Services provides 24-hour customer service. Call toll-free 844-845-9944. That's 844-845-9944.
What's up, Fadernauts? Studio Dome loves Fade to Black and the F2B audience so much that they have put together the ultimate stereo Bluetooth system. They've done it just for you. Man, check this out. The Studio Dome SBB2 stereo system is here. It's featuring two Studio Boombox 2 SBB2 wireless Bluetooth speakers, packed in its own custom hardshell case. This Studio Dome system features the very latest in stereo Bluetooth technology. The two full-range boomboxes are in true wireless stereo. You've got to hear this. It's amazing. It's just $129 and use the promo code JCRTWS and you'll also get free shipping. It's simple. Just go to jimmychurchradio.com, click on the Studio Dome banner. Go Beckley Teppy.
Erica, Brittany, Gabby, and you're listening to JimmyChurchRadio.com.
It's not a lifestyle we chose. We were born this way. KGRARadio.com.
This is KJCR at JimmyChurchRadio.com.
All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. Randall Carlson will never disappoint. What a fantastic show. Now, we're going to go through this next image, which is cosmic numbers. Randall, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to hand this off to you. It's going to take some explanation. But when I saw you do a presentation on this, I watched it probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 times back to back. It is one of the most revolutionary and evolutionary things anybody can check out when it comes to sacred geometry, because this is, I want to say this with I want to be very pointed. This is not a mistake. This is not coincidence. This is real. And that number, 25920, which we all know what it represents, is here. So let's start. I'm going to just hand this off to you because you explain it so well.
Well, this represents the zodiacal wheel, and the numbers are precessional numbers, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. In most interpretations of it, There are some alternate interpretations we could get into, but that would be pretty complicated, especially without having access to imagery. But basically, the idea is that the current rate of precessional motion has been measured at just slightly above 50 arc seconds per year, which translates into a number slightly less than 25,920, but 25,920 has been a traditional number associated with the great year concept. And, you can haggle over, a few years one way or another, but it's the same idea that, you have an idealized archetypal pattern, which, as, a designer and builder, I think of that as the blueprint, and then you've got the real-world manifestation of that archetypal pattern. And just like, any architect can design a building with high degree of precision, once it's executed, there are going to be small discrepancies that crop up, and then especially through the passage of time, those discrepancies can magnify, so that if you go out and you make accurate measurements or accurate surveys of existing ancient structures, you can infer what their intent was geometrically or metrologically, that is, in terms of what units of measurement that they were using. For example, if you had a builder from Europe using the metric system and built a house, and next to it you had an American builder build a house using feet and inches, virtually anybody could go out there with measuring rules and figure out which was which, right?
Right.
This was built with the metric system. This was built with feet and inches. Well, the idea here is that, you've got these numbers that quite accurately define the transition of the vernal equinox through the 12 signs of the zodiac. Now, I said 12 signs, not the 12 constellations, because the constellations themselves vary in size, but they have been idealized into this circle divided into 12, which is a really fundamental operation of sacred geometry. It's one of the things that we do in our in our classes as a person learns how to lay out this 12-fold figure and then begin to encode astronomical information in it, such as we have done here. But the idea is that when you look at these numbers represent intervals of time, right? But when you start looking at the numbers, they also represent spatial measurements as well. So, for example, if we go and we look at roughly what would be about 1 o'clock, if this thing was a clock, you see the number 2,160. And BP means years before present, okay? Now, in geometry, we have the 5 regular polyhedra, which are basically three-dimensional forms that have all of the faces composed of the same polygons. So you can have a tetrahedron, which is composed of 4 equilateral triangles. You can have a cube, which is composed of 6 squares, right? You can have an icosahedron, a dodecahedron, an octahedron, which is composed of 8 equilateral triangles. Well, the idea here is that when you measure space, the system that has come down to us is the sexagesimal system, which basically incorporates a base 6 and a base 10. And there's a logic to this in that, all circles are universally divided into 360 degrees, aren't they?
That's right.
The reason for that is that it goes back to this thing we talked about earlier where the radius of a circle exactly steps off the circumference 6 times. So what they have done is they have unified the 6-fold division with the 10-fold division and come up, 6 times 10 is 60. And then 6 times 60 is 360. 360 has a whole lot of prime factors. It for a number that is relatively workable in size, it has the greatest number of prime factors. And so what that means is that any circle divided into 360, you can subdivide that into slices of pie with nothing left over. So, for example, 360, you can divide 2 into it, 3, 4, 5, 6, not 7, but 8, 9, 10, not 11, but 12, and so on. And so you've got a high number of these factors which allow you to subdivide this circle into a lot of different useful subsections, right? So the 12-fold is one that follows very logically and almost organically from the 6-fold division of the circumference of a circle. And the ancients divided the wheel of the zodiac into 12 equal pie slices, and then they named each of those slices after the constellation that occupied that slice at that time, right?
Right.
So now, going back to this 2,160 BP, what that does is falls on the cusp of Aries and Pisces, right? So if we go back 2,160 years ago, basically the vernal equinox was poised between Aries and Pisces. We come forward 2,160 years, now it's poised between Pisces and Aquarius. But going back to the polyhedra, if you take the cube and using the sexagesimal system that goes back at least to the ancient Babylonians and probably much earlier, what happens is let's think about this. You've got a solid, which is a cube. Each face of the cube is a square. Each square has 4 right-angled corners of 90 degrees. If you take the 6 face, the 90 degrees times 4, right? Mm-hmm. Think about that. 90 degrees times 4 is going to give you 360 degrees per face. Then there's 6 faces, so the total number of degrees that measures the cube is 2,160 degrees.
Now, stop right there. Stop right there. That is not only what you come up with the 6 faces of the cube, but now we are dividing up the precession of the equinox into time, and you are able to then, based off starting with the cube, each one of these numbers represented on the 12 points is actually a number that can be equated back into some geometric form. Now, how is that possible? Are we talking about? Is this religious? You know, where is this coming from? Because it all interconnects: time, space, geometry, the zodiac, the precession of the equinox. Randall, this is a mind-blowing concept.
Yes, it is. But we're just really getting started, Jimmy.
It freaks me out. It freaks me out. It completely freaks me out that these kind of numbers are so magical, and how they fit linear, they fit 3D into time and space, but they also go back to the precession and the wobble of our planet over a 26,000-year period. It's almost too much to comprehend.
Well, to come down to the cusp of Gemini Taurus, where you see the number 6,480 years before present.
Right.
Plato said that the symbol of the universe was a dodecahedron, interestingly. Now, a dodecahedron is 12 faces, and each face is pentagonal, right?
Right.
Now, you have 5 corners in the pentagon, and the angle between each pair of edges is 108 degrees. So if you multiply 108 times 5, you're going to get 540 degrees measures each face of the pentagon. Not pentagon, the dodecahedron. Now, you've got 12 pentagonal faces, each of 540 degrees, which comprises the entire dodecahedron. So you multiply the 540 by 12, and what do you get? You get 6,480 degrees is the measure of the dodecahedron. And so it goes. I mean,
right.
The whole thing, and basically, when you take the measures of the 5 regular polyhedra, what you discover is by various combinations of the polyhedra, you can generate all the numbers on this wheel. So, interestingly, the same set of numbers links the measure of time and the measure of space.
Right.
And that, to me, is really one of the most profound things that comes out of the study of sacred geometry. But what's more, Jimmy, is that we promised we weren't going to talk about this tonight, but I've got to mention it because we talked about it so much before.
Sure.
The Younger Dryas, right?
Right.
Do you recall the date for the onset of the Younger Dryas?
No, but you're going to tell me right now.
Well, in all of the scientific literature, it's usually given as 12,900 plus or minus 100 years.
Right.
Which puts it precisely on the opposite side of the wheel from us at the cusp there of
25,920. Yes. Oh, man. And again, is this just because this is the universe, right? And numbers and geometry and space and time have to be related and interconnect?
Yeah, I would have to fall back on some kind of an explanation like that because, for me, I look at it, it's a mystery.
Right.
St. Augustine said numbers are the thoughts of God. Galileo said mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. Johannes Kepler said geometry existed before the creation. It is co-eternal with the mind of God.
Right.
Geometry provided God with a model for the creation. That was Johannes Kepler. And, of course, Plato allowed no one into his academy as is well known, inscribed over the entrance to his academy. He said, "Let none enter here who are ignorant of geometry."
Did you ever try to find fault in this? Did you try to find some type of a geometric enclosure and make the math wrong, or does it all fit?
No, I haven't been able to discredit it. It's there. It's one of those things, and it's there. The measurements are there. The numbers are there. They come from independent sources. Really, the only way you can not deal with this is to declare it a coincidence and then just forget about it.
Yeah, Michael Shermer. So I had to do it. That's 3 Michael Shermers in one show. But see, this is the thing. Anybody can do it. Anybody can go and take some multi-sided geometric form, measure the angles, count the sides, and multiply. You're going to come up with a number that is going to match on this wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and skeptics that I've encountered have basically said, well, it is all coincidence, and if you use numbers other than 360 degrees of a circle. But the point is that the 360 degrees of a circle is not arbitrary. It's something that comes out of the logic of geometry. It's a number that could come up independently numerous times by people studying these things and going, okay, this is what makes sense. Because, like I said, it goes back to the idea that this simple geometric idea of the relationship between a circle's radius and its circumference. And it goes so much further than what we've just looked at here. I mean, we're just looking at page 1 here of a multi-volume set.
Right. And then this, the coup d'etat, the closer on this is the fact that we have the great year of 25,920. I just can't wrap my head around it. The numbers are the numbers. The great year, the precession of the equinox is what it is, but they are one and the same here, and they lock step.
Well, they do, and that's, to me, what's really, really interesting. And, there's so much to this that we could get into. Basically, when I look at, for example, the world, I look at the solar system, I look at the larger system that it's part of, I can't help it. I see design. I see architecture. I see a teleological matrix, if you will, to the universe. The way things have come together are just extraordinary. And, there's so much we could get into, Jimmy, but, I'm thinking back to this study that came out in the late 90s. There was a study looking at how comets were delivered to the inner solar system, right?
Right,
and it turns out that comets are fundamental, that comets are probably contain the raw materials for the creation of life. When you have a terrestrial matrix that is suitable. You introduce the seeds of life, and the agency whereby you introduce those seeds is comets. Comets not only introduce life, they can destroy life. What happened 12,900 years ago was most likely Earth encountering a fragmenting comet, right? And this ties us back to concepts of the Grail and exobiology and a whole lot of really interesting, juicy stuff we could talk about. But what I'm getting at to here is that when a group of scientists were looking at the proportions of the solar system and looking at how comets could be delivered from their zone in the outer solar system in the Kuiper disk to become Earth crossing, where they could deliver their cargo of volatiles and exotic materials to the terrestrial biosphere. It turns out that the 4 large outer planets are critical for bringing those comets in. And one of the lead authors of this study was Harold F. Levison, who noted that comets are essentially being handed off from planet to planet. And he called it a celestial bucket brigade. And if these 4 planets, the 4 Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, were spread any further apart, then the comets could not be handed off as they are now. I mean, it turns out that each of the outer planets, like Neptune, will draw comets in from the Kuiper disk. Once they have passed within the zone of Neptune, Uranus can now begin to exert its influence and essentially draw them in, so they're now captured by this, the gravitational force field of Saturn. Saturn will do the same thing and hand them off to Jupiter. Jupiter will then either throw them back out into the disk, into the depths of the great deep, or it will begin to vector them in towards the sun, where they become Earth crossing. So what's really interesting is that with the structure of our solar system being any different than it was, this whole process couldn't happen. So, you know, when you begin to look at this thing, there becomes it becomes hard to avoid the hypothesis, anyway, that there is design in the natural order. That our solar system is set up with a very unique set of parameters. And if you change these parameters, even in the slightest, the whole thing
collapses. Yeah, collapses completely.
Collapses, yes. Get rid of our moon. Boom. We're gone.
Yeah,
Life
we're
is
gone. Yeah, we're gone. We're gone completely. And and also Jupiter sucking in all of those celestial events that would have just pummeled this planet into dust. Right?
Right.
Think about that for a second. It's a trippy thing. So that's when you go to, is there a higher source? Is there something divine? Is there some intelligence to this? Is it beyond just mathematical odds that all of this just happened to happen, and you and I are allowed to speak on this radio station tonight because of just rolling the dice? It doesn't feel that way to me, Randall. It just doesn't, and I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, you know, we're confronted with a mystery with a capital M. You know, I look at some of the Native American traditions, and they refer to creation as the great mystery, and that's kind of where I'm at. You know, I'm just completely awestruck by the whole system. How it came to be, listen, I'm clueless. What the ultimate source of it all is, I can't say. I don't know, other than the fact that it's stupendous, it's awesome beyond words, and it's a great mystery. And I think that part of the purpose of our existence and our consciousness is to contemplate the meaning of this great mystery. Maybe there's no resolution to it. I don't know. I don't know what the final answer is. But I do believe that there are basically 2 types of humans on this planet. Those who go about their lives oblivious to the mystery and wonder of the world about them, and then the other group, who maybe is probably a minority, that daily is awestruck by how amazing this whole phenomena is. You know, it's kind of like, I think of it this way, you know, quite frequently, there's a big farmer's market where I live. I go there 2 or 3 times a week. It has a huge parking lot, and it has a really wonderful place where you can actually see the sky. I'll typically stop there on my way home from work, and I will get out of my truck, and I will look, and the sky is just breathtakingly beautiful, just awe-inspiring, almost to the point where it almost brings tears to your eyes. The sun is going down. You've just got this array of colors and beauty, and I'm standing there completely awestruck. People are coming and going, and no one even bothers to look.
I know,
no one
right?
bothers to stop and go, wow.
What are you looking at? And with that, Randall, I've got to go. I'm going to run credits now. Just stay right there, and I'll let you say good night to everybody in about 45 seconds. Stay right there.
Sure.
This has been Fade to Black, Sacred Geometry 101 with Randall Carlson. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Kamarian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Paul, Mark T. Kovar, LJ3, Renee Jonas. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitoa, Mark D. Kovar. Fady by Dale, Webmaster Drew, The Geek, Music, Doug Aldrich, Intro, Spaceboy, SpaceboyMusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA The Planet. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2017 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. And I'm just going to say good night to everybody, Randall. Randall, say good night.
Oh, good night.
There you go. And I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Right tomorrow night, Phil Proctor, Fire Sign Theater. Randall, you big Fire Sign Theater guy when you were growing up, right?
Oh, yeah. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent in stitches listening to those guys, probably, 45, 48 years ago.
Can you believe it? And we have them tomorrow night on Fade to Black. So until then, everybody be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.